grade 8 history. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at World War One, and we're going to be looking at specifically trench warfare. So this is just revision for the exam, just going over the content again, and then maybe at the end of everything once I've done the whole topic, then we can go and we can do some source-based skills. The biggest issue that I'm finding with the grade 8s though is the lack of writing an essay. So maybe instead of doing source based, okay, so maybe then I'll do 2 lessons, one on essay, one on source based, just so that you can start to get into the habit of writing essays, writing source based, and being aware of what you need to do when you get into that exam. Right, so let's just jump straight into it and share my screen. Right, so we've done World War One. The last time we were here, we did the main causes of World War One, and our focus was on the militarism, the alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. More in the middle here. Now there you see my dirt more. All right, let's keep it like this. And we also discussed another cause, which was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So we had a look at the map of Europe and where in the world everything was. We did the glossary, then a bit more detail. All right, now today we're going to do trench warfare. Right, so our focus is going to be on conditions in the trenches. Now, what you need to be aware of is that trench warfare isn't anything new. So people had been using trenches before in earlier wars, but what makes World War One or the Great War so unique is the fact that trenches were used more often, and it was almost exclusively used for this war. The reason for that is because of the invention of new things in the 1900s. So things like aeroplanes were invented. Poison gas was a new issue that they didn't have to deal with before in previous wars. They had things like rapid fire guns, machine guns, that could fire hundreds of bullets in a second. So the traditional way of warfare just wasn't working anymore. And they tried, in the beginning of the war, Germany and France basically tried that traditional way of warfare where one walks and then the other one walks and they meet on a field and they shoot each other. But because of all these new inventions and things, it was just impossible. Both sides were not able to get into the other country and overwhelm the other force simply because it was just a massacre. People just died like flies. And so people have to dig into trenches. So if we can't face each other face to face, I used this example in my class where I said, you guys, many of you guys play Call of Duty. And you know, with Call of Duty, you don't just run at the guy with the gun. You have to get to cover. So trench warfare was basically digging up your own cover. Like you dug about, I would say 2 people down. So let's say what? No, more than 2 people. No, it would be about 2 people down. So me and another me down, and then you would stay in the trench and you just pop your head up, boop, 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 go down again, right? So that was what trench warfare essentially was. So why trench warfare? Trench warfare reached its highest development on the Western Front during World War One. That was 1914 to 1918. Like I said, it was nothing new, but that is where it was used the most. Both sides dug trenches after, hey, shut up, relax. Dug trenches after Germany and France were halted by the deadly fire of machine guns and bombs. The sheer quantity of bullets and shells flying through the air forced the soldiers to dig into the soil for shelter. So I have explained that. This is just my slide explaining it. So don't mind Cheddar over there. She's doing the chat room. Right, so this is how a trench looks like or looked like. So you had sandbags just so that you had a bit of rest. You weren't directly onto the soil, which could give way or fall. So you had that sandbag in front of you. You had a sandbag behind you. You had an elbow rest with wood, and then you had barbed wire in the front. So if anyone was brave enough to cross this place called no man's land, let me just do that. This is no man's land. So this was called no man's land because only a crazy person would do this. So basically, somebody would jump up out of the trench and then try and run across, but it was basically suicide to do that because of the fact that people had machine guns, people had bombs, they had landmines. So anybody that ran or tried to cross no man's land, that's basically a death sentence. So most just stayed in the trench. If someone was lucky enough to get to the other side's trench, the barbed wire essentially stopped them from going any further. I mean, you had an ammunition shelf that was dug out into the trench so that when you run out of ammo, you can just put your head back in, load your gun again, pop out again. There was a fire step so that people would climb up one step and then they would be able to shoot from here, right? You also had a duck board to kind of keep people from the, like, it's, what do they call it, grogginess and the dampness. So if any of you have ever like dug a hole in the ground, you'll see when it's conditions are rainy and wet, then that hole will fill up with water and that mud, it will get very, very muddy. So the duck board was meant to kind of mitigate that a little bit, to kind of stop that from getting into people's shoes, but it didn't really help, which we will discuss later. They also had the dugout for resting. So if they were not on duty, then they would go into the dugout. Right, so next up. So soldiers usually spent 1 day to 2 weeks in the trenches, and then they were replaced by fresh soldiers. This allowed them to rest and rotate through support duties such as filling the sandbags or acting as reserve forces. It was very important for them to rest because of the fact that many soldiers experienced trauma from being in the trenches and just constantly being surrounded by these bombing sounds. And sometimes your friend that's next to you would just die and you just have to carry on. So it was a very traumatic time, and so it was very important that soldiers were constantly rotated in and out of the trenches. Right, so there was not enough medical support in the trenches, which means that if you got sick, you could die. If you got a cut, it's very easy for that cut to get infected because of the fact that you're in such unhygienic and unsanitary conditions. So if some dirt falls in your wound, very easily, the germs get in, you get a fever, you get sick, right? You also had bombs that were exploding very close by. And if any of you have ever watched Iron Man, the first one, you'll see what happened when Iron Man was next to that bomb and the bomb exploded and the fragments of the bomb got into Iron Man. So that happened to many, many people. The bomb would explode, but the bomb wouldn't really hurt them in the explosion. It's the little fragments and the little shells that get lodged in and then it gets infected and the people get sick and die. And it was, in that case, more dangerous than just being shot straight up. Soldiers could also die or suffer long-term damage from head injuries caused by exploding shots. So I already mentioned that the conditions in the trenches weren't exactly clean. So it was very easy to get infections such as dysentery, which you can kind of think like the diarrhea. They also had cholera, parasites, fungal infections. And then in the winter time, the weather was so cold that the soldiers fighting in the trenches ended up getting frostbite, ended up freezing to death in some cases. The trenches were dirty and could be filled with water and become muddy, which I have explained before. And they were often infested with rats and lice. So, you know, in primary school, I don't know if I saw that, well, when I was in primary school, they used to have like lice inspection and they used to comb our hair and everybody like checking for lice, because if one person has it, it spreads very easily to everybody else. And the problem is with this rats and this lice and all of this is that if it's untreated, it can cause sickness, and it could cause very, very serious sickness like tick fever and stuff like that. So because the conditions were so dirty, these animals or these pests were allowed to breed, and they actually caused more dangerous conditions for the people in the trenches. And always, because of the trenches that are constantly being bombed, constantly being shot at, that constantly required repair, especially due to damage from not only the bombs but also the weather conditions. If it rains, then a sandbag falls down, or if a bomb blows up, then the whole trench is destroyed. So the trench kind of, initially it starts off like a straight line, and then it starts going all over the show. Right, so the next thing I'm going to show you is not for sensitive viewers. So if you are a sensitive viewer, if you can't handle extreme imagery, consider this your warning to click away, okay? So this is something called trench foot. So remember I told you earlier that the trenches would sometimes get muddy and there's water in it from the rain and from the snow and those kind of conditions. Now, if any of you have ever been in a bath for a really, really long time, you'll notice that your fingers start to wrinkle up, right? So in the trenches, people's feet would get wet because of the wet and muddy conditions. It would go through the shoe, go through the sock, and then they would stand in that wetness for hours and hours and hours. And it eventually sort of rotted away at their feet, and they got something called trench foot. So you can see it's a subsiding inflammatory stage of trench foot. The process was more severe than on the left, was treated by packs for a few days. The left foot was used as a control. Our appearance of feet immediately after therapy is A, and B is the feet 4 weeks later. So they tried to kind of treat the feet, but you see it didn't really help much. A better result had been expected on the basis of the initial appearance of the feet. The wet ice treatment was considered of no value, right? So yeah, the feet basically like rotted away, pretty gross. Right, so we're going to end this video here, and the next video I'm going to do, we're going to speak about the Treaty of Versailles. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.